Welcome back to the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge podcast with your host, as ever, myself, Alex Connor, where we talk everything training, nutrition, and lifestyle collectively. And this week, a rare solo episode because I wanted to talk to you about a key important message, some recommendations, and some considerations around returning to training after the gyms reopen. And this is something that's going to happen soon, depending on where you are. It's going to be happening over the next couple of months for most of us with positive thoughts and thinking. However, there's going to be a lot of people heading out of the gym as fast as they go in if they don't keep a couple of key things in mind. So I wanted to jump the gun. I wanted to get ahead, and I wanted to go through what I believe are some of the most important key points and give you some takeaways, some actionable takeaways that you can apply when you do return to training to avoid injury or overtraining, fatigue, and getting out of the gym just as fast as you re-entered it. I mean, what a shame that would be if you're really passionate and you love the gym to have gone in too hard, too soon, a little bit gung-ho, which we've all done, and then be straight back out again, or even worse, to a chronic injury. So with that in mind, I'm going to keep this one a bit more streamlined, but we'll see how we go for time. There are a number of important points and topics that I want to elaborate on and go over. And I will also be recommending some resources as well. So I'm going to start in no particular sequential order. All of these points are important, so take them as you may. Some will be more applicable to others, and I'll talk about some of the parameters, some of the differences depending on your current situation. So without further ado, let's dive in headfirst to this returning to your training after the quarantine lockdown. Point number one. Let's talk first about strength. So strength is a skill. It's how well you can move through a given movement pattern, range of motion, with a certain load over time. So the more skillful you become at a certain movement, let's say squat, bench, or deadlift, the more load effectively you can move over time, and the more effective and efficient you become, and the more muscle mass you can build, obviously, with the presence of hypertrophy. Therefore, you can get bigger and stronger over time. So if you have been someone that has had access to fairly heavy weights or even movement patterns and equipment that replicate movements that you've been doing, so say again you are interested in the squat, bench, and deadlift, then it's going to be a lot less intrusive. It's going to be a lot easier for you to integrate back into the gym, especially if you've been using like for like weights. There might be a few different discrepancies. It might be the bar, it might be the load, etc. It could even be the footwear, the platform that you've been using. But for the most part, you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of similarities there. So it's not going to be too difficult to actually reintegrate. And you're going to progress fairly quickly. However, that said, and just as an aside, any external noise, I do apologize for. My computer seems to be making the wrong noises at the wrong times, as well as some noisy neighbors, but that's sod's law, and the show must go on, as they say. So moving swiftly on to the next point, with the strength and the skill in mind, now let's talk about appropriately conditioning. So strength and conditioning, yes, well done. How long have you been detrained for? And again, this depends on your situation. Are you someone who has had access and had the luxury to using the same equipment or the same sort of loads that you've been working with again on the squat, bench, and dead? Best case scenario, you've had a home gym just as good as the gym, but even then there'll be differences. Worst case scenario, you've had completely nothing, or again, you've done nothing. But if you're on this channel, I'm imagining that is not going to be you, because you do have an interest in training, so you're probably doing a little bit of something. Are you injured? Have you been injured over this time? Have you already been out from training for a long time, all of these things are going to affect the way you integrate back in to a degree, or how fast that you'll be able to progress and recondition and adapt back to the stress and stimuli that is going to be applied on you. So with the strength element and the conditioning in mind, depending on your situation, you still want to take it cautiously. You still want to take it on the slower side. Always better to rest on the side of caution, go a little bit slower and reintegrate in, than to overdo it. Now, another point before we move on is that you may have lost some size and obviously some strength. Now, we've talked about strength being a skill and that will return as and when. Now, in terms of size, you've probably not lost as much as you think. A lot of that size will be due to the lack of glycogen via carbohydrate and water that is stored in the muscle cell itself. So unless you've been doing absolutely nothing and just lying around, you've probably not lost that much at all. It'll just be that fullness, that pump almost that you get, if you like, when you train. And muscle memory will aid you here and will help you return and help that initial size and those glycogen stores and any lost tissue reintegrated and regain quite fast. The next thing I want to talk about is not trying to match your numbers. Now, this sounds like a fairly obvious concept, a fairly obvious thing. However, we've all been guilty of it. I know I have. When you come back off training, or perhaps you've not done a lift for a while and you think, well, I usually do this and I'll give it a go. No. Hold back, okay? Have some self-restraint, have some discipline. That will come back in good time, but to avoid injury, to avoid possible injury, to avoid central nervous system burnout, to avoid overtraining, okay, and creating more soreness and damage than you need to, you want to take it a little bit easier. So there's something that we call graded exposure, or tapers if you like. Now, what we want to do is we want to slowly, as the term suggests, expose ourselves in a gradual, in a graded fashion, and slowly taper up our volume. Now, an aside here is that perhaps you were doing a little bit too much before, and this is a really great opportunity to realize that, hey, perhaps I don't need to do this much volume to actually grow. Perhaps I can grow with significantly less and still make progress. And you can save that volume or the increased loads when you are doing more time, more reps and sets in the gym for when you really need it later on, when you get advanced. A lot of the time we don't actually need as much as we think, and that is the exact same with retaining muscle mass as well. There's been a big fear that everyone's going to lose all of their gains, and it's just not true. The body is quite clever, and the body can maintain muscle tissue with very, very little activation over time. So we want to take a nice tapered approach. We want to, again, grade our exposure on the way in. We want to slowly expose ourselves, okay, to the stress and stimuli. And we want to apply what we could call intro weeks, or if you like, deload weeks. So for those who are familiar, a deload is a purposeful reduction in overall volume and usually to some degree intensity to let the body recover for a small period of time before you reintroduce that volume and then taper back up. So generally, let's say we have a 4-week block. Let's say we have a mesocycle, and in each mesocycle we've got a microcycle, a week block, and we have an intro week, and we have a build week, an attack week, and a deload week. So this is a bit more advanced. So you would have an intro week, which is very, very gradual. You might have only 2 sets, okay, or even 3 as an advanced athlete, and then the next week you might have 4. The percentages go up, the actual intensity goes up, and then you might have your last week where it goes up again. You might even do drop sets or be working to, AMRAPs, etc., and you'll have a deload, taper all of that volume, okay, and then intro week again, and then rebuild. So it's kind of like if you look at a graph, it's like a staircase. So it goes up, 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 down, down, up, 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 but every peak is slightly higher than the last to a degree. It's what we can call wave loading. But without getting too much into progression, ultimately, depending on where you are as an athlete, you still want to take a very introductory approach, a deload approach, if you like, to taper back in. So something that I'm going to be recommending for all my clients is that we take it very, very, very easy, very cautiously. So I will look at what they were generally doing on a deload, and I will probably even reduce that further, and I will intro them with a similar volume or a similar set and rep range, and obviously taper the actual intensity by utilizing what we call RPE, so rated perceived exertion. So when we look at RPE, it's a scale between 1 and 10, 10 generally representing maximal exertion, complete failure, and 1 super, super easy. So we usually aim, depending on our goal and where we're at in our training, about a 7 to 8 to a degree in the sweet spot. However, we can aim a little bit lower, we can aim a little bit higher depending on the weeks. But I would say to pull it back even to a 5 or 6 will be appropriate. You've got to remember, these movement patterns, although they might not be new to us, they are still going to be slightly foreign because we've not done them for a long time. So an example that I always use, for example, is if we were to go rock climbing tomorrow, despite whether we train or not, we would both, be very, very sore. Now, you might argue that, hey, we'll say someone who's been training would be less sore. Now, that might be the case to a degree. They might be a little bit fitter, they might have a little bit more stamina and strength, sure, because they've got more muscle tissue, more coordination, etc. But if it's a new skill or it's something that the two people or you and I have not been exposed to for a while, we're probably going to be very, very sore. So even by changing a machine, for example, you might use a lat pull down in one gym and use it in another gym. And because the fulcrums and the levers and the weights, it might even be the discrepancy, the way the load's distributed, it could be the implement of which you use a lat pull down, you'll be more sore. So the body's very, very clever. So unless we've all been using the exact same gym and the exact same equipment and the exact same volume and load, we're probably going to be quite sore, and it's going to take us a few weeks to actually readapt to this training stimulus. So utilizing RPE is a really good way to actually gauge and make sure that you're not going to be overtraining too much to the point where you're going to be hurting yourself, you're going to be damaging yourself, or you're going to be taking that intensity just way too high. And it's going to be a thing that we see, mark my words, across social media. I'm sure there'll be a lot of gym memes, etc. There'll be people going in too hard too soon, and they'll be straight in and they'll be straight out. So we want to approach this more intelligently. In terms of percentage-based training, so for those of you who might be utilizing that or a little bit more advanced, you are going to want to again grade that. You're going to want to reduce that back. So say you're usually using 70% all the way up to 90%, you might even taper that back and taper up to it a little bit more gradually. I think really, if we put this into perspective, it'll just be a nice pleasure to be able to go in and use the appropriate equipment, to move weights, to feel everything. Use this time to really focus on your skill acquisition, get your technique bang on, warm up properly. This is almost a clean slate for a few people. Drop the bad habits, hire a coach when you can, or go in a group, train with someone more experienced, learn some new skills so you can approach your training much better, much more effectively, much more intelligently. The next point is training intuitively, or as I like to call it, common sense. So intuitive, it's like intuitive eating. It's a bit ambiguous, because if your intuition is not accurate, then it's no good. It's almost like telling someone who has just come out of comp prep, oh, just eat intuitively. Well, they're going to overeat and they're going to get very overweight very fast. So that's where we need these systems and processes and strategies in place so that we don't actually go off the rails, so to speak, and that we can have some sort of guidelines that can, create good habits and behaviors and relationships when we do actually get back in. So when we think about common sense, and we've all got it, despite popular belief, we might think about, okay, if I'm going in the gym and I've done, the first day or the second day and my body's quite sore. Now, that doesn't mean you can't train, but maybe I'm going to taper it back a little bit. Or perhaps, if I was doing 5 days, I'm going to start with 4 days or whatever it is. Or maybe I'm going to drop a set or reps off. Perhaps, no, I don't need to go to failure. It's going to be very tempting to want to push yourself to that next limit, to match that number, to get those reps, to hit, whatever you were doing last time. That's going to creep into your head. So if we use a bit of common sense and we use a bit of restraint and we think about the bigger picture, that we want to get in here day after day, week after week, we want to build up, we want to progress again, then it makes sense to sacrifice a short-term pleasure for a long-term gain, if you like. So just getting that initial, gratification from doing that lift, but you might be destroyed the next day, or even worse, cause injury. It would be much better to just leave that one in the wayside, come back to it at a later date when you're reconditioned, and just put some volume through the muscle. Just get through those movement patterns, provide enough stimulus for the body to adapt, and then you can live to fight another day, as they say. Now, some underrated things that we always talk about here that are going to be more prevalent than ever are sleep, nutrition, and stretching. Now, sleep should, as always, again, I'm not going to get into it because those who are aware know how passionate I am about sleep, but it is single-handedly one of the most underrated and the most powerful elixirs for recovery, for growth, for everything in your body. And again, if you want a little bit more in depth, you can go and listen to a podcast with Michael Grandner that I did a few months back, and he will give you a bit of an insight to how important sleep really is. Now, this is going to be vital. It's going to be vital for us to be getting that 8 to 9 hours, 7 minimum. Yeah, look, honestly, it's probably not. You're going to want the 8 or 9. You're going to err on the side of a bit more. And just because you go to bed at 10 and get up at 6 doesn't mean you had completely 8 hours, wherever it might be, because you generally don't fall asleep straight away. So you've got to keep that in mind, your sleep and wake cycles. You want to try and get consistent. Nutrition, of course, as always, paramount. Making sure and ensuring you've got enough protein, making sure you're eating enough food, making sure that most of your nutrition is coming from wholesome quality sources, and making sure that you are well hydrated despite your location, despite the environment and the temperature. You're going to want to make sure that you are providing those nutrients and giving your body the best chance to recover and regain any lost muscle tissue of which you may have lost within this time. Stretching, no one wants to do it, and rehab work, but again, single-handedly will change and improve dramatically your mobility and your performance in the gym. Now, generally static stretching, so stretching where you're stationary, you want to leave for after your training, or if you do it during and before, you want to keep it to sort of 20 to 30 seconds hold, because if you do overstretch, you can cause injury and reduce the adaptability of strength to some degree as well. There is research that suggests doing intraset stretching up to 30 seconds can help, but again, without getting into the nitty gritty, I would leave static stretching for after and mobile before, so dynamic stretching, etc., to give you a bit of an ideology. But again, if you are someone who has neglected rehab work and you've got muscles which are tight, you've got sore back, and you've got niggles and little injuries, this would have been a great time to really overcome them. And if you found that your body now is feeling great and it wasn't when you were training, then perhaps that's a little bit of a sign that you were doing too much, or perhaps there is some more rehab work to do. Although you're always going to have little niggles to a degree, it's never going to be utopia, but this could be a little quaint sign of, hey, perhaps I can approach my training once again a little bit more pragmatically and a little bit more intelligently, without always feeling so beat up all the time. Perhaps I was overtraining. Now, we're going to need a little bit of patience. We're going to have to be calm, and we're going to have to be focused. We're going to be very excited. It's going to be great when we get back into the gyms. For the most part, the atmosphere is going to be pumping. It's going to be great to see your friends again, your buddies, your gym pals, people that you might have not seen. Everyone's going to be raring to go, and it's going to be really, really easy to, get caught in the moment and just sometimes overtrain and, lift something that you don't want to lift. You might be, with your mates, and you want to, you want to show them what you've got. I've not lost anything, it might be a couple of nice ladies that you're in front of, that you get a burst of testosterone and you feel the need to do something or lift something that you shouldn't be doing. So it is going to take a little bit of discipline, a little bit of mindfulness, and I urge you to do so, because otherwise you're going to be one of those many people sitting on the sidelines once again after you've just re-entered, and that is something that we do not want to do. So we want to make sure that we're creating good relationships with our training, with our mobility, etc. And we want to ensure that we are approaching our training, again, be excited, be proactive, but we want to be strategic and we want to be calculated. Now, some closing thoughts. I will provide some of the resources. There's been some great podcasts on re-entering the gym already, some from 3D Muscle Journey, some of which mentors and practitioners of which I follow. Mass monthly applications in strength sports have had some great posts, some great articles, some great videos that they've posted in the past on this that are sort of resurfacing now as well, which is going to be absolutely fantastic in that reintegration into getting into training. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. I've rambled on enough. They were the key points that came to mind. They're the main things in the forefront. I may have forgot a few things. Once again, if you've got any questions, queries, or concerns, please feel free to reach out. If you are interested in coaching, I am still doing online. There's a little bit of one-on-one happening, but mostly online and academy stuff. Once again, the links to the Fearless Training Academy are all in the show notes below. That is international 24/7, 365. It's the Netflix of fitness. It's everything you need to know, educating you on all of the key points so you can start to do this yourself and, again, approach your training more intelligently for the long-term gain. You can email me at alex@fearlesstraining.org or reach out on any social media platforms. Leave a rating and a review on iTunes or Spotify. It really helps and I really appreciate it. So as long as you're not in the car and it's safe to do so, put that on the top of your to-do list. Go and do that now. It'll take you literally 2 minutes. If you're watching and listening on YouTube, make sure you subscribe for weekly videos and regular updates. I really appreciate the support as it helps the channel grow. And as always, I will be here back next week with another very talented guest where we unpack the journey, the lessons, the experiences for all of you listeners so you can benefit in your own lifestyle and training endeavors too. And as always, team, until next time, stay fearless.